Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of Views of an Outsider, The Outsider's View from October 26th. If you want to keep up with everything that's going on in the world, but you don't want to drag down your entire life by listening to the news every day, then get the main stories right here once a week, and spend the rest of your time actually living your best life. Let's get right into it. We are going to start off with a headline that seems more like the plot of a Hollywood film. Last Sunday, thieves broke into the Louvre in Paris, and in only 7 minutes they made off with some historic pieces of jewelry that the Interior Minister of France said were of incalculable value. According to the BBC, the group of thieves used a motorized lift on the side of the museum that is under construction in order to reach a higher balcony. They then used a glass cutter on a window to gain entry to the Apollo gallery of the museum. The alarm was immediately triggered, and once inside, the thieves dealt with other forms of security by threatening the nearby guards, who then left the area. At that point, the thieves broke into a display case that housed some of the crown jewels of the various royals of France. The thieves then joined their accomplices on the street, where they escaped on scooters, fleeing along the banks of the Seine River. And as I said, the entire escapade lasted no more than 7 minutes. Thankfully, nobody was harmed during this heist, but the thieves were able to steal, perhaps forever, tiaras, earrings, and other treasured pieces of history that together contained thousands of diamonds and other jewels. According to the New York Times, the tiara alone, which belonged to Empress Eugenie, the wife of Napoleon III, contained 212 pearls, 1,998 diamonds, and 992 rose-cut diamonds. The sapphire set, consisting of a matching tiara, necklace, and earrings, was also stolen. Together, the pieces contained 1,083 diamonds and 24 Ceylon sapphires, which are only found in Sri Lanka. The bandits also made off with an emerald and diamond necklace that Napoleon gave to his second wife, Maria Louise, as a wedding gift in 1810. That necklace included 32 emeralds and 1,138 diamonds. It was part of a set that included a pair of matching earrings, which were also stolen. The only silver lining is that the losses could have been even worse. In their haste to get away, the thieves abandoned their attempt to steal the crown of Empress Eugenie, which contained nearly 2,500 diamonds and more than 50 emeralds. It was, however, damaged during the robbery. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, called the heist an attack on a heritage that we cherish, and pledged in a post on social media that the jewelry would be recovered and that the thieves would be brought to justice. He also claimed that a new Renaissance project for updating the Louvre includes improvements to the museum's security. The biggest concern now is that the jewels may never be recovered. Experts say that the thieves would certainly know that they would likely get caught if they tried to sell these highly recognizable pieces on the black market. So it's a very real possibility that they could be planning to remove the stones and melt down the precious metals to sell them off individually, piece by piece. Meanwhile, speculation has been running rampant about a crime that seems like something out of the Thomas Crown affair. Many people are wondering if this could have been an inside job. They want to know if someone on the staff at the Louvre could have been in on it and helped in the planning. The country's foreign minister said that they certainly were not ruling out an inside job. Others have also questioned why these specific jewels were targeted, especially given that a display case housing the famous Regent diamond, a stone that is worth $60 million, lies in the very same room that the thieves hit. Even some French officials have expressed confusion over why the thieves, who clearly had done their research, ignored such a prime target, even though it was sitting just a few feet away from them. And zooming out to the big picture, unfortunately, heists like these are becoming something of a trend in France. Just last week, a group of thieves stole a number of collectible clocks from the President Jacques Chirac Museum. And last month, a separate heist saw thieves lift $700,000 worth of gold from the French Museum of Natural History. Weeks before that, $11 million worth of porcelain was stolen from yet another museum. And even the world-famous Louvre has been hit before. A diamond-studded sword was stolen from that museum back in 1976, and most famous of all, the Mona Lisa itself was lifted back in 1911. Thankfully, the iconic portrait was ultimately located 2 years later and returned to a place where it can be seen and enjoyed by all the people of the world. But the ridiculous stories of the week were just getting started. Last Saturday, reportedly more than 1 million demonstrators took part in a second round of anti-Trump No Kings protests that were held at over 2,000 locations around the country. The protests were notably made up of primarily white boomers, and many of these serious protesters came dressed as lobsters, chickens, unicorns, and Superman. In a failed attempt to encourage us to do the same, the media took the cosplay seriously enough to interview the dude who had dressed up as an inflatable pink My Little Pony unicorn. But needless to say, the media was alone in their very serious treatment of the utterly ridiculous. Online, the protests were mercilessly mocked, and while the demonstrations were largely peaceful, there were some pockets of violence. And there were quite a few speakers and attendees who were advocating for violence as well. In Portland, 3 protesters were arrested for assault. In the Chicago area, 15 people were arrested after clashing with law enforcement outside of an ICE facility. In Los Angeles, police had to deploy tear gas after being forced to declare the escalating situation there to be an unlawful assembly. As far as the exact purpose of the protest, protesters expressed anger with nearly every move that Trump has made since taking office. But his crackdown on illegal immigration and the related National Guard deployments seem to be at the forefront of the talking points. Still, the relentless media coverage of these costumed protesters, and of even worse spectacles, like the grotesque, obese woman who was hopping sideways in order to get into the camera frame as she gestured at shooting herself through the neck, did draw attention. But it was to which organizations were funding this. And that was when Peter Schweizer and his Government Accountability Institute found out and reported to us that nearly $300 million had been funneled to these protests organizers from billionaire-backed networks. I thought that leftists claim to dislike billionaires. Except when it's our billionaires, yeah. Morning Wire spoke with Seamus Brunner, the Director of Research at the Government Accountability Institute, about the money trail to these supposedly organic protests. He told them, what we found is that these are extremely well-funded, these organizations. We calculated over $200 million, really closer to $300 million in the last 5 years has gone into the partner organization. This is basically anything but grassroots. The main person who keeps coming up is George Soros, and we thought, well, it's not just George Soros and his Open Society Institutes. He's a main financier of all kinds of left-wing projects, including the protest industrial complex. But there's also this Arabella network. They are a major financier of these protest movements and groups. There's also the Tides funding network, the Ford Foundation funding network. We've looked at probably a dozen or so funding networks with more than $10 billion flowing through these accounts. But the main ones we put into our report were the Soros, Arabella, Tides, and a few other funding networks. When asked if any of these groups would be held accountable for funding protests that have tended to become more and more violent in recent years, Mr. Brunner responded, "That's my sense. I was at the White House last week talking with President Trump and Attorney General Pam Bondi and FBI Director Kash Patel. They all seemed very locked in on this issue, wanting to get to the money, not just the boots on the ground and the people committing the violence, but who is financing this. I've spoken with some people at Homeland Security Investigations. They seem to be very interested in the follow the money aspect. I think that they are working their way up. And as for Antifa's new designation as a terrorist organization and how that will play into all of this, he said, at the end of the day, the people who they arrest, whether they're domestic terrorists or not, are going to be charged with violent crimes. These are the people who are assaulting ICE officers, setting fire to cars and buildings. And as far as the Democrats' gaslighting narrative that Antifa is somehow a non-existent myth, Mr. Brunner pointed out, it's preposterous to say that Antifa isn't an organization just because it doesn't have an LLC or an EIN or some sort of corporate entity. There's all kinds of groups that don't have corporate entities that can be investigated as organizations. He added, but law enforcement has the tools to follow the money, even in those ways that we don't. So this is just what the regular people were able to uncover. And where there's smoke, there's usually fire. So attention, which I know that you love, may not be your friend right now if you have any skeletons to hide. And speaking of skeletons, on Sunday, the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, announced that the U.S. military took out another drug smuggling boat that he said was connected to a Colombian terrorist group this time. According to Hegseth, the vessel is linked to the ELN, also known as the National Liberation Army, a designated foreign terrorist organization. The ELN is one of the most powerful insurgent groups in Colombia, according to the National Counterterrorism Center. With around 2,500 fighters, the group aims to control portions of Colombia where drugs are produced through armed assaults, assassinations, extortion operations, and hostage-taking. Hegseth said, the vessel was known by our intelligence to be involved in illicit narcotics smuggling, was traveling along a known narco-trafficking route, and was transporting substantial amounts of narcotics. There were 3 male narco-terrorists aboard the vessel during the strike, which was conducted in international waters. All 3 terrorists were killed, and no U.S. forces were harmed in this strike. These cartels are the Al-Qaeda of the Western Hemisphere, using violence, murder, and terrorism to impose their will, threaten our national security, and poison our people. The United States military will treat these organizations like the terrorists they are. They will be hunted and killed just like Al-Qaeda. In an effort to pressure the Colombian authorities to crack down on their drug trafficking, President Trump announced last weekend that he would be cutting off all foreign aid to that country, saying on Sunday night, they don't have a fight against drugs. They make drugs. They refine drugs. They make cocaine. They have cocaine factories. They have no fight against drugs. And I'm stopping all payments to Colombia because they don't have anything to do with their fight against drugs. They are a drug manufacturing machine, Colombia, and we're not going to be a part of it. And speaking of criminals that we have every right to want no part of, authorities arrested an armed illegal immigrant who was illegally carrying a loaded 9mm handgun after he also allegedly put a $10,000 bounty out for the deaths of our federal immigration agents in Dallas, Texas. Let me get this straight. You have the nerve to break into my home, and instead of saying, please let me stay, I'll work really hard to make sure that you never have a single reason to regret it, you break even more of our laws, go around committing crimes on our soil, and then you have the arrogant gall to think you have some right to put out bounties on the heads of my American neighbors? Oh, we'll see about that, you over-entitled little thug. Those are not the actions of an oppressed victim seeking refuge. Those are the actions of a foreign oppressor who thinks he has the God-given right to conquer everywhere he goes. This illegal immigrant from Mexico, Eduardo Aguilar, broke into our country, and then according to the Department of Homeland Security, on October 9th, he had the stomach-turning nerve to go on TikTok and publicly call for, quote, 10 dudes in Dallas with determination who aren't afraid to, and then he posted 2 skull emojis and offered, quote, $10K for each ICE agent. And this threat on Dallas came just a couple of weeks after a sniper opened fire on an ICE facility in Dallas, killing 2 detainees despite targeting the ICE agents. And as we covered last week, bounties have also been placed on the federal officers who are conducting Operation Midway Blitz in Chicago. Some of those bounties amount to over $50,000. And Mexican cartels are behind many of these bounty threats, and they have also reportedly been placing armed spotters on rooftops in the Windy City. The question is, why? If Chicago is safe and under control, as the left tells us at least 10 times a day, then why do cartels in Mexico, another country, care so much about what goes on in a city that is all the way up by the Canadian border? Yeah, something in the politicians' narrative doesn't add up. Because the only answer that makes any kind of sense is that these foreign criminal gangs have a very powerful foothold in that city, one that they clearly don't want to lose. But if that is true, then there is simply no way to justify fighting against the American government liberating that city from a foreign criminal stranglehold and kicking them out of our homes. But Texas is fighting for its people instead of for the cartels. And they shut this one-man bounty factory down in their state. In a democracy, I would just remind you that the people choose. And choices are all about the contrast. On Friday, the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, Tricia McLaughlin, pointed out, thanks to the quick work of law enforcement, this illegal alien, who was offering $10,000 cash bounties for the murder of ICE law enforcement, is in custody and facing federal charges. We are thankful this illegal alien, who had a firearm in his possession, was arrested before he could kill one of our law enforcement officers. Our agents are facing ambushes, terrorist attacks, and death threats, all because they dare to enforce the laws passed by Congress. We will not back down from these threats, and every criminal, terrorist, and illegal alien will face American justice. As previously pointed out, Eduardo Aguilar was carrying a loaded 9mm handgun when he was arrested, and it is a felony for an illegal immigrant to possess any kind of firearm in our country. But of course, this was not his first crime. According to DHS, Aguilar crossed the border illegally in 2018 as an unaccompanied minor. He was then ordered to be deported by an immigration judge the next year. During his illegal time here in the U.S., Aguilar racked up a criminal history involving an alcohol problem, and he is now charged with making these threats. And he will pay the price for that. There are far better people humbly waiting for his spot. And paying the price for your own choices is an inevitable, universal reality for human beings everywhere. On Monday, the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that President Trump can deploy Oregon's National Guard to Portland to protect ICE facilities amid violent protests in that city. That same day, Abigail Jackson, a White House spokeswoman, told the Daily Wire, "As we have always maintained, President Trump is exercising his lawful authority to protect federal assets and personnel following violent riots that local leaders have refused to address. This ruling reaffirms that the lower court's ruling was unlawful and incorrect." According to the San Antonio Express News, the Texas National Guard is still not allowed to deploy to Portland until a decision one way or another is reached on that. Meanwhile, senior judge Susan Graber, who was appointed by former President Bill Clinton, strongly disagreed with the new ruling, claiming that no legal or factual justification exists to send in the Oregon National Guard. So just replace Chicago with Portland, and second verse, same as the first. While ignoring the Portland protesters who have lit fires, thrown rocks, and fired off fireworks at ICE agents, she cherry-picked which type of protesters count, saying, given Portland protesters' well-known penchant for wearing chicken suits, inflatable frog costumes, or nothing at all when expressing their disagreement with the methods employed by ICE, observers may be tempted to view the majority's ruling, which accepts the government's characterization of Portland as a war zone, as merely absurd. But today's decision is not merely absurd, it erodes core constitutional principles, including sovereign state control over their state's militias and the people's First Amendment rights to assemble and to object to the government's policies and actions. I strenuously dissent. Sweetie, you do have the right to peacefully assemble, and you still do. The key word being peacefully. That's in the Constitution. You might want to read it. And if that's all that you are already doing, as you claim it is, then the National Guard being there will be a total non-event, right? Because they'll have nothing to do in the peace-filled landscape of Portlandia. So why all the caterwauling? Once again, the narratives here don't add up. And in another case of, if at first you don't succeed, try again, on Monday, the U.S. Attorney for D.C., Jeannie Pirro, announced that charges have been filed against 2 more teenagers who were allegedly involved in the violent attempted carjacking of 19-year-old Doge employee Edward Cortesini after last week's shameful non-sentence regarding a brutal assault that left Mr. Cortesini with a concussion and covered in his own blood. Federal prosecutors have now charged 19-year-old Lawrence Cottonpowell along with 18-year-old Anthony Taylor with robbery, assault, and carjacking in connection with the attack on the popular Doge staffer known as Big Balls. According to Ms. Pirro, not long before Mr. Cortesini was severely beaten while protecting his girlfriend from harm, these same 2 non-minors were both involved in the mugging of a victim named Ethan Levine. Even before that mugging and the violent assault of Mr. Cortesini, Ms. Pirro noted that both suspects were already repeat offenders who should have been locked up in jail for the other offenses that they had committed. They simply should never have been given the opportunity to attack these two innocent men in August, given their glaring history. Ms. Pirro said, Lawrence Cotton Powell is 19 years of age. He is now charged with first-degree robbery, for which he faces 15 years in prison. He also faces a charge of assault with intent to commit robbery, another 15 years. And robbery for Edward Cortesini, 15 years. Assault with intent to commit robbery, another 15 years. And attempted carjacking, 5 years. Now, for those of you keeping score at home, that's a possibility of 65 years in prison, which means that if he gets a real judge who takes their job seriously and actually knows what that job is, then this little thug could be in prison until he is 84 years old. 4 years after the average American lifespan ends. Can you hear me now? Ms. Pirro then went on to detail how previous judges had ignored her office's request for jail time for Cotton Powell, which might have turned things around for him before this harsh sentence was on the table, and it definitely would have spared his victims. But instead, completely unfit judges harmed everyone involved by repeatedly letting this teen loose on probation without using any consequences to teach him a vital lesson before it was too late. A short time after he was released in each case, he allegedly committed other crimes that landed him right back in the crosshairs of prosecutors, and judges merely decided to rinse and repeat so that they could feel good about themselves. They certainly were not helping anyone else, and here we are. Ms. Pirro added, the co-defendant in this case is an individual by the name of Anthony Taylor. He is fraught with the same crimes. This is what you call compassion, is it? Compassion for whom? You? Because it isn't compassionate towards the people who didn't have to become career criminals and spend the rest of their life in prison. And it certainly isn't compassionate to their countless victims. So other than making you feel good about you, who is all of this toxic compassion helping? I truly want to know, and so do a lot of other voters out here. But not everyone has been blinded by toxic empathy, and some people actually do the right thing, even when it is hard. On Monday, police successfully stopped a potential mass shooting when a 49-year-old man was arrested at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International after he allegedly threatened to shoot up the nation's busiest airport and drove there armed with a semi-automatic rifle. Atlanta's Mayor Andre Dickens said at a press conference that a major tragedy had been averted. According to Chief of the Atlanta Police Department, Darren Shirebaum, the suspect was identified as Billy Joe Cagle, a convicted felon who said over a live stream video that he planned to shoot people at the airport. Fortunately, family members saw Cagle's video, and they did the right thing for him and for others by choosing to notify the Cartersville Police Department, which then notified the Atlanta Police Department. Cagle's family also warned police that he was in possession of a firearm just 14 minutes after Atlanta police were notified of the threat. Cagle was arrested in the airport. He had been there about 10 minutes or so, longer than the police. Police also found a semi-automatic rifle in his vehicle, which was parked outside. Airport security footage was released at the press conference by police who said, "From video, we will show you he seemed to be very interested in the TSA check-in area, which you can see was heavily crowded with travelers." Body cam footage that was also released at the press conference showed Atlanta Police Department officers confronting Cagle before taking him down to the ground and placing handcuffs on him. Chief Schierbaum said that the officers had to use 2 handcuffs to detain Cagle because of his size, adding that the suspect is 6'3" and 320 pounds. When authorities searched the suspect's truck, they found an AR-15 rifle with 27 rounds of ammunition. Police said that if the police officers had not stopped him when they did, they believed that the suspect was planning to retrieve the rifle from his pickup truck and open fire on the innocent travelers in the crowded terminal. Chief Schierbaum said, "We're here today briefing you on a success and not a tragedy because a family saw something and said something." Cagle faces charges of making terrorist threats, criminal attempt to commit aggravated assault, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and possession of a firearm by a felon. All of which, I would point out, are nothing compared to what he would be facing right now if he had actually murdered people. And that's assuming that he lived to face those consequences, which is usually not the case. So yes, this is the better thing to do for the person that you love. A hard thing to do, but the right thing for them, and definitely the right thing to spare countless people from having to put the people that they love into coffins in the ground. The era of denial and silence must end for everyone's sake. Compassion has to be more than a word. It has to actually succeed in producing better results than the alternative would have done. Switching gears for a moment, you may have noticed that the political news from the last 2 weeks has had an intense amount of focus on foreign policy issues. In addition to negotiating the ongoing ceasefire in the Middle East, President Trump met with Ukraine's President Zelensky at the White House last Friday, and Trump seemed to be pivoting again, coming across as much less bullish after his recent conversation with Russia's President Putin. The result was that Trump indicated that he is not ready to provide Ukraine with the Tomahawk missiles that they've requested, yet. We will return to that subject shortly. Then on Monday, Trump also had a decidedly productive meeting with Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Full disclosure, I dislike Prime Minister Albanese, but even a stopped clock is right twice a day, and this week's news was definitely good. Our 2 leaders signed a critical rare earth mineral deal that will lessen our reliance on China, which is obviously a good thing. Under the agreement, the United States and the Australian governments will jointly invest over $3 billion in critical mineral projects during the next 6 months, with an expected $53 billion worth of assets to be gained by this, according to the White House. The deal also includes a lot of new defense investments that will strengthen the alliance between the United States and Australia. But despite the flurry of activity all across the foreign affairs front, there was obviously attention being paid to domestic affairs as well. On the home front, the shutdown still shows no signs of ending anytime soon, and rumors on Capitol Hill suggest that the lower rank-and-file Democrats want to negotiate an off-ramp, but no one has said what that off-ramp would look like. So we, the people, are watching and waiting to see what Democrats will do, as evidenced by the poll numbers on this issue that don't show any movement, another subject that we will return to in a moment. But hopefully several needed changes will be forthcoming. A Christian couple, Lydia and Heath Marvin, had their license to be foster parents revoked by the state of Massachusetts back in April after the couple refused to sign a gender-affirming policy. That couple is now taking legal action, claiming religious discrimination. According to Morning Wire, the Marvins have been fostering children since 2020, primarily infants and toddlers with special medical needs and other challenges. the kinds of children that very few homes are equipped or willing to handle. Their record shows that the Marvins have accepted cases that other homes had turned down, and now those precious but often unwanted children will go without loving care because of ideology. Sounds great, right? The Marvins declined to sign the Massachusetts revised LGBTQ non-discrimination policy, specifically the section requiring foster parents to affirm a child's gender identity and sexual orientation. The Marvins argue that signing that would conflict with their sincerely held Christian beliefs. Now they have initiated legal action claiming that this is a case of religious discrimination in violation of their First Amendment rights. DCF officials insist that their duty is to protect children, even if it means leaving them without a loving home over a fringe issue. And in their view, protecting children means placing all children only in homes that will affirm their gender identity and sexual orientation, even for young toddlers to which no that applies, and young children who are perfectly normal and do not have any issues at all with gender dysphoria. This completely illogical dictate has caused critics such as a journalist who has written extensively on family policy and is considered to be a child welfare expert, Naomi Schaefer Riley, to say that clearly the state has lost sight of the bigger mission here. Ms. Riley told the Daily Wire, a lot of these states have just really lost sight of the goal, which should be providing as many options for safe, loving homes as possible to these kids. Ms. Riley says this case fits a growing national pattern where religious foster families are being pressured to abandon their beliefs or lose their foster kids and stop fostering children in desperate need altogether. That is a serious problem because, according to a study that was released just last month, Christians are more than 3 times more likely to actually foster a child compared to those who have no religious affiliation, which makes perfect sense when you think about it. They are also more likely to permanently adopt children out of the foster care system. And this case, unfortunately, is not a one-time blip. In Massachusetts, another couple, Mike and Kitty Burke, were rejected as foster parents last year, despite some truly unbelievable qualifications, after expressing traditional Catholic beliefs about marriage and gender that didn't happen to align with the state's ideological policy. And in Oregon, a woman named Jessica Bates was denied a foster license for refusing to commit to gender-affirming practices. Her case is now before a federal appeals court as well. Ms. Riley says that many more conflicts never make the headlines, but they are happening, and vulnerable kids are paying the price for this culture war obsession, saying once they make clear they're looking for parents who fit a certain mold, people of faith either violate their own principles to comply, or they just don't sign up at all because they know the agency is going to be hostile to their religious practices. But there is hope that a stop will be put to all of this nonsense and that flesh and blood children will be prioritized over elitist ideology once again. One major court precedent for this is the 2021 Supreme Court decision, Fulton versus the City of Philadelphia. In that case, the court ruled that the city did violate the free exercise clause when it stopped contracting with Catholic Social Services because that agency wouldn't certify same-sex couples. So same-sex couples had to go through one of the countless other agencies who would certify them, which they usually went to anyway. But if Philly couldn't make the Catholic Church disavow its 2,000-plus-year-old beliefs and bend the knee and pledge allegiance to the city's LGBTQ god, then they were going to be penalized into compliance. The Supreme Court, however, said that because Philadelphia's rules did allow for exceptions in certain other cases, the city could not then turn around and deny a religious exemption. Legal analysts say that the Marvin case could hinge on very similar reasoning. Its success will come down to whether the Massachusetts policy is deemed to be truly neutral and generally applicable, or if it targets religious beliefs, which it is not allowed to do. And as usual, when it comes to luxury beliefs, it is the ordinary, voiceless people who will pay the price until this is sorted out. Because the Marvin's lawsuit, which was filed with the help of Alliance Defending Freedom, is still in its early stages. But you have to start somewhere, and the sooner that the battles are fought, the sooner you finally get to the day of victory. So keep fighting for what you know is the right thing. Ignoring the so-called little issues is how we got here, with everything in a mess all at once. And it is especially important to remember that you cannot ignore your own side when it comes to doing the right thing, because that is exactly how the left got into the mess that they are drowning in right now. So, with that in mind, a man who was pardoned by President Trump after taking part in the January 6th riot at the Capitol was arrested last weekend for allegedly threatening to kill the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries of New York. According to court documents, 34-year-old Christopher Moynihan was taken into custody on Sunday after he wrote in a text message that he was planning to eliminate Mr. Jeffries at an event on Monday where he was speaking at the Economic Club of New York City. Moynihan's text message said, quote, "Hakeem Jeffries makes a speech in a few days in New York City. I cannot allow this terrorist to live. Even if I am hated, he must be eliminated. I will kill him for the future." Delusions of grandeur much. According to the New York Post, after an investigation by an FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force, New York State Police arrested Moynihan and rightly charged him with making a terroristic threat, which is a felony. According to New York State Police, he will remain in jail in lieu of $10,000 cash bail, a $30,000 bond, or an $80,000 partially secured bond. Concerning his January 6th involvement, Moynihan was one of the more than 1,500 Capitol riot defendants who received a blanket pardon from President Trump shortly after Trump was sworn into office in January. Moynihan was seen in photos walking on the Senate floor on January 6, 2021, after rioters breached the Capitol. Prosecutors alleged that while he was on the Senate floor, Moynihan rifled through a notebook on top of a senator's desk and said, quote, "There's gotta be something in here we can effing use against these scumbags." He pled guilty to 5 misdemeanor charges and was sentenced to 21 months in prison in February of 2023. And he is not the only pardon that was a mistake. Earlier this year, a 42-year-old Indiana man, who was also pardoned by Trump for his involvement on January 6th, was shot and killed during a traffic stop after he allegedly resisted arrest and raised a firearm at police. And a third man, who was convicted for his role in the Capitol riot, was arrested only weeks after his pardon for allegedly breaking into a home in Virginia. Look, some people deserved to be pardoned, and some people did not. Refusing to admit that in some stubborn show of loyalty will come back to bite you in the ass. I would remind the right that refusing to rein in the crazy on their own side and defending every wrong that their own fringe commits is the very thing that destroyed the Democrat Party. I would encourage you not to make the same mistake, or I promise you, you will suffer the same fate, because ticking time bombs don't care whose face they blow up in. So prove to the people who live in the middle, the ones that decide elections and don't have a loyalty to one side or the other, that you are actually different. Hold your own side accountable and reject your own crazies, full stop, without a single word of defense. Because your loyalty only matters to the people who are voting for you no matter what. It does not matter to the people who might vote for the other side if you turn them off. Turning back now to the international news. The British activist Tommy Robinson visited Israel this week, and his trip included a visit to Yad Vashem, the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, which led to him issuing a public rallying cry in support of the Jewish state on Monday, as he rightly warned good people to beware of the dangers emanating from all of the anti-Semitic rhetoric that has spread all across social media like a disgusting fungus. He began by saying, "Yesterday, I visited the Holocaust Museum in Israel. It was the first time for me. To go into detail, to hear in detail, to understand actually the depravity of the crimes that were committed against the Jewish people, and not just depravity, but what built up to it. And do you know what I took from that museum and what I took from that tour? I understood a lot more why words are so important to the members of the Jewish community. I'll be honest, sometimes over the years, when words have been said, even innocently, I've seen a massive backlash and a huge deal made out of these anti-Semitic tropes, or allegations of anti-Semitic tropes. I never quite understood it. After visiting that museum and understanding that Jews didn't just get murdered to start with, there was a big buildup of propaganda to do with anti-Semitic tropes. I learned a lot more, and what I took from here gave me more of an understanding why there's so much emotion from members of the Jewish community. That's what I took from here. It made me understand a lot more why there's so much fear. And for then, remember, I haven't gone through that history. That was my first time, but I guarantee every single British Jew, every Jew around the world, understands the full horrors of what their people and their race went through. So, really, you understand why this homeland, this country, why this place of safety is so important to them. And also why they must fight and never stop fighting because of what history has done to them. Tommy's trip was the result of a high-profile invitation that was extended to him earlier this month by Israel's Diaspora Affairs Minister, who called Tommy a courageous leader in the fight against radical Islam. Robinson is known for his unapologetic stance against jihadist extremism, especially in Britain, and more recently he has become known for his support for Israel. Israel's Diaspora Affairs Minister wrote this on X. In the wake of the horrific Manchester terrorist attack, Israel and the Jewish people stand firmly with our allies in the United Kingdom. Tommy is a courageous leader on the front lines against radical Islam. He has proven himself a true friend of Israel and the Jewish people. Tommy accepted the minister's invitation to visit Israel, and he emphasized that he was undertaking the trip as a personal journey, not one that was motivated by compensation of any kind or fanfare, but a trip motivated by shared values and a mutual struggle. Saying on X, the horrific Manchester attack has strengthened my conviction that the United Kingdom and Israel are fighting the same battle against the scourge of Islamic jihad. Their fight is our fight. I'm a proud British patriot and a Zionist. Ditto, my dude. Tommy's statement caused the Speaker of the Knesset, Amir Ohana, to declare, "Looking forward to hosting you at the Knesset, mate. You're doing a great service to your country, but more than that, as I have said repeatedly since October 7th, far from being a local struggle, this is a global battle between the forces of radicalism, extremism, and fundamentalism, and those of freedom, liberty, and democracy. Western civilization is under attack, and it's our duty to stand firmly together and win. See you in Jerusalem." In other parts of the world, on Tuesday, the right-wing conservative Sinai Takaishi was sworn in as Japan's very first female prime minister, shattering a political glass ceiling for women and clearly indicating that country's decisive turn to the right. An acolyte of Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, I hope I'm saying that right, and an admirer of Britain's former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, Miss Takaishi is expected to return to her hero's style of government stimulus as she attempts to jumpstart an economy that is struggling under slow growth and rising prices. Her victory definitely marks a pivotal shift in a country where men hold overwhelming sway. But the even bigger reality is that Ms. Takaishi is also expected to make a very sharp turn to the right on immigration and defense, reflecting the broader rightward shift in politics that is happening all around the globe. In her first press conference, the new prime minister said, "I am determined to deliver results for the nation, to build a strong Japan, and to never give up. I also plan to meet President Trump at an early date to elevate the Japan-U.S. relationship to new heights." Her election represents hope that the severely fractured politics of Japan can find a way forward. A frequent visitor to the Yasukanai War Shrine in Tokyo, Ms. Takaishi has also called for a revision of Japan's post-war Pacific Constitution to recognize the nation's military forces. And Japan's rising political star, Shinhiro Koizumi, will serve as her new defense minister. If I mispronounced any names in that, I apologize. I did my very best. Back home, the tides continue to shift, whether everyone accepts it or not. The latest CNN poll suggests that despite their attempts to spin a very different narrative, Democrats are not coming off as the winners of the ongoing government shutdown, and President Trump, on the other hand, is not losing any ground at all. CNN's chief data analyst, Harry Enton, broke down the details, saying that there was a world of difference between the way that voters viewed the current shutdown compared to how they viewed the 35-day-long shutdown during President Trump's first term. Enton declared, "Turns out shutdowns are different the second time around when it comes to Donald Trump. Take a look here. We speak about Donald Trump shutdown net approval ratings. We're talking 20 days into it. In 2018/2019, Donald Trump's net approval rating was already falling. The shutdown was eating into his popular support. It was down 3 points already at this particular point and would fall considerably more. It was very much on the decline. This shutdown hasn't eaten into Donald Trump's support at all. His net approval rating is actually up a point in terms of his popular support. So the bottom line is this. The first shutdown during Trump's first term was hurting Donald Trump. This one is not hurting him at all. There's no real reason Donald Trump might say, at least when it comes to popular support, I want to get out of this shutdown." Meaning, the Democrats have not gained the leverage from this stunt that they need in order to successfully pull it off. When asked about the blame for the shutdown and who would end up shouldering most of it, the numbers reflected a similar shift. Less than half of those polled, 48%, blame President Trump for the current shutdown, compared to the 61% who blamed him in 2018. That is a 13% difference. It's a different world, Eaton concluded. Yes, it is. And it is going to go right on changing, hopefully for the better. On Tuesday, Senator Ted Cruz threw his support behind a measure that is designed to prevent non-citizens from voting in American elections. Senator Cruz signed a letter with Congressman Eli Crane and dozens of co-signers in support of a petition to the Election Assistance Commission from America First Legal Foundation, asking them to start requiring voters to present proof of their citizenship in order to register as a voter in federal elections, instead of gambling with our nation's elections by relying on the current honors system. The Daily Wire reported that the letter said, "Unfortunately, the current federal form falls short of that mandate. It relies solely on self-attestation of citizenship, allowing an applicant merely to check a box under penalty of perjury. This honor system offers no meaningful safeguard against ineligible individuals registering to vote. Requiring documentary proof of citizenship is a simple, common sense reform, just as Americans are asked to show identification for far less consequential activities, boarding an airplane, opening a bank account, or even attending certain events. It is entirely reasonable to require proof of citizenship to participate in our elections. This step would not burden eligible voters, but would provide an essential check to ensure that only citizens are added to the voter rolls. Only a handful of states have laws on the books requiring their voters to go beyond just checking a box that says that they are a citizen, including Arizona, which was once the only state that had a law requiring any kind of proof. The office of Arizona's Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, told the Daily Wire in an email, "Arizona is no longer the only state that requires DPOC, but we are the only state that has been doing this for over 2 decades and have fully implemented a program that anticipates all impacts on voters." If successful, this common sense petition would require people to verify that they are a citizen with a passport, a real ID through their state, a military ID, or any other type of photo ID from the government that confirms that the person who is registering is a citizen of the United States. Because, as the letter stated, the right to vote is one of the most fundamental privileges of American citizenship, and protecting that right requires a system that is both secure and trustworthy. But while we all acknowledge that many problems out there desperately need to be fixed, things absolutely could be much worse. And they are in so many places around the globe. On Tuesday, President Trump delivered a stark warning to Hamas, vowing that if the terrorist group continues to violate the peace deal, the, quote, end to Hamas will be fast, furious, and brutal. Trump also pointed out that many countries had signed on to the agreement and told him explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, that they would welcome the opportunity at my request to go into Gaza with a heavy force and straighten out Hamas if Hamas continues to act badly in violation of their agreement with us. I told these countries and Israel, not yet. There is still hope that Hamas will do what is right. If they do not, an end to Hamas will be fast, furious, and brutal. Last week, Trump wrote bluntly on Truth Social, "If Hamas continues to kill people in Gaza, which was not the deal, we will have no choice but to go in and kill them." Regarding that situation, the Foundation for Defense of Democracies reported, quote, "On October 13th, the Hamas-affiliated Arrow unit publicly executed 8 members of Gaza's Dagmuh clan on charges of allegedly collaborating with Israel. Since the ceasefire between Palestinian factions and Israel went into effect on October 10th, Hamas has carried out a campaign of punishment against clans, militias, and individuals in the Gaza Strip that it has accused of opposing the resistance. The Arrow unit also warned that it would continue to target the Dagmush clan, the Abu Samra and Halaz families, and others who opposed Hamas during the war. Professor Kobe Michael, a senior researcher at the Institute for National Security Studies and the Mizgov Institute, added to Fox News Digital that they continue reconstituting themselves and attacking the IDF by using the tunnels, using the shafts, going out, because they now feel much freer because the IDF left the populated area. Hamas is still using the tunnels and intends to reconstruct the tunnels that were destroyed by Israel because they intend to continue the war against Israel. They immediately recruited thousands of people and deployed them and are butchering their own people. They do not intend to give up on their position and influence in the Gaza Strip, and they do not accept the idea of dismantling themselves, and they do not accept the idea that a foreign force or board will govern the Gaza Strip. So the reality is that someone is going back in there, either Israel or preferably an Arab force from the more trustworthy nations that have signed on to the deal insisting that Hamas disarm. Definitely not forces from Qatar or Turkey, who both have a history of funding Hamas and would end up pulling the same shit as UNRWA. Indonesia and Azerbaijan seem like good choices, as do the Saudis and the UAE. But nothing gets any better for Palestinians, Israelis, or the Middle East until radical terrorists are eliminated from the picture. So I'm just telling you right now that someone is going back in there. Back in our own hemisphere, there was good news. Florida's Attorney General announced on X that authorities had arrested the man who was accused of threatening to kill the founder of the Babylon Bee, Seth Dillon. Mr. Dillon launched his satirical news site, Babylon Bee, in 2016 in an effort to speak truth through humor. The outlet quickly grew into a major phenomenon with 2.2 million followers on Instagram and more than 5 million followers on X. And attempts to shut down their growing influence only seem to backfire every time. Before Elon Musk purchased Twitter in 2022, they suspended Dillon's account over a post where he was poking fun at USA Today's male pick for Woman of the Year. Elon Musk reinstated that account 7 months later when he assumed ownership of Twitter and it became X. The controversy continued, but so did the wins. Recently, the Babylon Bee found itself in court arguing over a bill that had been signed by Gavin Newsom, limiting the use of what he called deepfake images, but the court sided with the Bee. And the Bee's attorney commented, the court was right to rein in California's blatant censorship. We can't trust the government to decide what is true in our online political debates. Unfortunately, the vile people who have no problem at all smearing everything that Charlie Kirk actually stood for by pushing the evidenceless conspiracy theory that Jews, conservatives, and Turning Point staff actually killed Charlie Kirk. Instead of the gay man with the trans furry lover whose own family confirmed that he hated Charlie Kirk, who admitted to killing Charlie Kirk in his text, who was caught on video, and whose DNA was all over the weapon and cartridges. But pay no attention to that meaningless stuff. There's a stupid fun conspiracy theory coming at you from the world's snake oil salesman. And now, those very same conspiracies have apparently motivated this psycho anti-Semite to try to kill a prominent Jew because he knew the truth and wasn't going to forget it. When Florida's Attorney General announced the arrest of this loser, he stated, "Last week our Office of Statewide Prosecution was notified of multiple death threats made to Jewish conservative media members who live in Florida." Following the notification, prosecutors secured an arrest warrant, which law enforcement then executed. The suspect is now facing charges of extortion, written threats to kill, and unlawful use of a two-way communication device. This disgusting online lunatic, who went by the name Zionists Are Scum, in which case I am proud to be scum in the eyes of people like you, has been identified by authorities as 28-year-old Nicholas Ray. The Daily Wire reviewed what is allegedly Ray's account and uncovered a host of disturbing posts about Israel, President Trump, and several conservative lawmakers. On Monday, Ray's intended victim, Seth Dillon, published an article with the Free Press urging both the right and the left to take a long, honest assessment of their own ideologies along with the policies that they promote. And on Tuesday, Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri announced that he will host a hearing on politically motivated attacks of violence in order to begin to address this disturbing trend. This summer alone saw the murder of Democrat lawmakers in Minnesota and the assassination of Turning Point's founder, Charlie Kirk. And if you go back just a few more months beyond that, you have school shootings, embassy staffers being gunned down, and much more. Senator Schmidt stated, "The rise of political violence on the left is deeply disturbing and antithetical to American values, disturbs the free exercise of our constitutional rights, and is a threat to our constitutional order." So, 1, it is good that the right is actually willing to condemn and arrest their own crazy people. And 2, every single individual on the right needs to take responsibility and quit giving oxygen to the people who push the crazy ideologies to the crazy people, or the right will end up being eaten by its very own mind virus, just like the left was. And speaking of the left, what's going on over there, you might ask? More than a dozen Democrat governors signed on to a new health alliance this week in an attempt to counter the federal health agencies under the Trump administration. The Governor's Public Health Alliance is claiming to be all about the science, while also claiming that the Trump administration, and in particular the HHS Secretary RFK Jr., is anti-science and Americans need to be protected. Yeah, I'll protect myself, thank you very much. So far, the Governor's Public Health Alliance is strictly partisan, and only Democrat governors have signed on to it. J.B. Pritzker of Illinois signed on to this association after claiming that Trump and Kennedy have turned the CDC into a misinformation machine. California's Democrat Governor Gavin Newsom also signed on saying that extremists are trying to weaponize the CDC and spread misinformation. Like the COVID vaccine is 100% effective? Because that would be worrying. Other states that have signed on include Colorado, Connecticut, Delaware, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, North Carolina, Oregon, Rhode Island, Washington, and the Territory of Guam. The residents in these states make up about 1/3 of the U.S. population, but not the third that I live in, so I don't care. As long as I get to choose for me, everybody else can listen to whoever they want to. But if you live in one of these blue states, this new alliance will dole out medical guidance that will likely counter anything that comes out of the federal agencies like the CDC and the FDA. At the very least, it will lobby the federal government on these matters. The allied states will issue their own public health guidelines and advise their constituents on the best practices to use when it comes to vaccines and other health issues. The people who are still wearing masks will also share medical statistics, data, and advice on preventative care, as well as their plans to buy vaccines and other supplies in bulk. The Wall Street Journal called this alliance a shadow public health alliance and added that it's the largest move so far to create an alternative public health universe outside the federal government. This association is primarily funded by a nonprofit called Governors Action Alliance, known as GovAct. That nonprofit claims to be nonpartisan, but it supports left-wing causes and generally teams up with Democrats on the issues that are forever in their talking points. For example, GovAct is behind the Reproductive Freedom Alliance, a coalition of 23 Democrat governors working to expand abortions. GovAct is also behind the Governors Safeguarding Democracy Alliance. That is basically a resist Trump effort that was launched within days of Trump winning the 2024 election. HHS spokesman Andrew Nixon pointed out that it was Democrat governors who destroyed public trust in public health. He noted that Democrat-led states imposed unscientific school closures, toddler mask mandates, and vaccine passports during the COVID era. He said that the Trump administration is rebuilding trust by grounding every policy in rigorous evidence and gold standard science, not the failed policies of the pandemic. Like I said, as long as I can choose for me, I don't have the slightest need or inclination to choose for you or anyone else. But if you can't extend me that same courtesy, then you and I are going to go round and round until you can't see straight. And speaking of seeing things that other people really don't want to see, on Wednesday, the American Accountability Foundation, a conservative watchdog group, filed a suit alleging that the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Institute of Health are withholding the release of key data from a government-funded study because it is expected to significantly undermine transgender ideology. The author of that study admitted to the New York Times that the results that they got would hurt the case in favor of placing young gender-confused children on puberty blockers. The president of the American Accountability Foundation, Tom Jones, told the Daily Wire, for over a year, HHS has been hiding a bombshell study that confirms what we've known all along. Transgender therapy is a failure. The lead researcher herself admitted that the findings challenge the effectiveness of these drugs. HHS bureaucrats are playing woke political games, ignoring science and common sense. The American Accountability Foundation first requested this data from the $9.7 million project that our tax dollars paid for, meaning the data belongs to us, after the Times published a story on October 23, 2024, that featured the lead researcher, Joanna Oslon Kennedy, admitting that she had delayed publishing the data on the effects of puberty blockers on children over political concerns. Very scientific of you. Aslan Kennedy admitted to The Times that the data did not show any improved mental outcomes for children who were placed on puberty blockers as opposed to those who were not. 5 days later, the American Accountability Foundation submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to get the data. However, according to the suit that was filed in D.C., the documents that they received came with significant redactions that obscured important data points. Mr. Jones filed an appeal of the redactions on January 6, 2025, but says that the issue has still not yet been resolved. The suit says that HHS and the NIH have violated federal records laws in their handling of this Freedom of Information request. The suit notes that AFF specifically requested a copy of the data to which Dr. Olson referred. However, a preprint version of Olson-Kennedy's study appears to be available, even though it has not yet been peer-reviewed. Olson-Kennedy and her co-authors now claim in that version that their research did show that, quote, youth demonstrated both stability and improvement in emotional and mental health over 24 months, which is not what she told the New York Times. So, if shady games are going to be played with the science for political reasons, then the American Accountability Foundation believes that all of the data from the study should be made available to the public so that it can be independently analyzed. AFF President Tom Jones said, "We're fighting back, suing HHS to force them to follow the law and release this truth. The American people deserve to know what's being hidden by the radical left." But turning from the discussion about the humans that are doing dangerous things to the thing that always ends up killing us all in every movie that's ever been made about it. On Wednesday, hundreds of public figures, including tech leaders, celebrities, media personalities, and politicians, please never invite me to that party, signed a statement calling for an immediate pause on the development of advanced artificial superintelligence. According to a preamble to the statement, superintelligence technology is currently being pursued by tech giants such as Mark Zuckerberg's Meta, Sam Altman's OpenAI, and Elon Musk's xAI. These companies hope to build superintelligence in the coming decade that can significantly outperform all humans on essentially all cognitive tasks. The preamble raised concerns about this, ranging from human economic obsolescence and disempowerment, losses of freedom, civil liberties, dignity, and control, to national security risks and even potential human extinction. Both Mr. Altman and Mr. Musk have warned about the potential serious consequences to developing advanced AI. In a blog post from 10 years ago, Mr. Altman wrote, "Development of superhuman machine intelligence is probably the greatest threat to the continued existence of humanity," which is why he's racing to create it. CNBC reported that earlier this year, Elon Musk discussed similar risks concerning advanced AI, saying that he believes there's only a 20% chance of annihilation. Oh, good. Only 1 in 5 odds that it kills everyone on the planet. As for this week's statement on superintelligence itself, which now has more than 1,000 signatures, it consists of just 30 words, which are as follows. "We call for a prohibition on the development of superintelligence not lifted before there is a broad scientific consensus that it will be done safely and controllably and strong public buy-in." Is controllably a word? Anyway, the former U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice and the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Admiral Mike Mullen, signed the statement, as did multiple former Democrat and Republican members of Congress. The statement was also signed by the conservative media personalities Glenn Beck and Steve Bannon. Numerous faith leaders endorsed the statement as well. Other high-profile signers included leaders in the tech industry, such as Apple's co-founder Steve Wozniak and the AI pioneers Yoshua Bengio and Geoffrey Hinton. In an individual statement, Bengio added that superintelligence could unlock solutions to major global challenges, but they also carry significant risks. To safely advance towards superintelligence, we must scientifically determine how to design AI systems that are fundamentally incapable of harming people, whether through misalignment or malicious use. We also need to make sure the public has a much stronger say in decisions that will shape our collective future. Signers argued that currently the designers of these systems are so stuck in this race to the bottom that they just feel an irresistible pressure to keep going and not get overtaken by the other guy. So, as that dude in Jurassic Park pointed out, you are so preoccupied with, can you do it, that you never stop to ask, should you do it? But the inevitable aside, there are some things that you just definitely should not do. For example, on Tuesday, Paul Ingrassia, a political commentator who previously wrote for the Daily Caller and the Gateway Pundit, and who is now a Trump official who had foolishly been tapped by the president to lead the office of the special counsel, withdrew his name from consideration following Monday's Politico report on Ingrassia's group chat, where he reportedly made inflammatory remarks about black holidays and proudly claimed to have a Nazi streak in him. One text that is apparently from Ingrassia read, MLK Jr. was the 1960s George Floyd, and his holiday should be ended and tossed into the seventh circle of hell where it belongs. You're an idiot. Martin Luther King was no saint in his personal life, but comparing a peaceful civil rights leader who changed this country for the better by ending segregation to a lifelong criminal who died of a drug overdose that he took of his own free will and set off the most expensive and most destructive riots in our nation's history. Again, I say, you're a moron. This is why merit is important in positions of power, children. A month after that proud display of very low IQ, the Trump official reportedly brought up black holidays again and used an Italian slur for black people. In another exchange, a person in the group chat wrote, Paul belongs in the Hitler Youth with Obergruppenführer Steve Bannon. To which Ingrassia allegedly replied, I do have a Nazi streak in me from time to time, I will admit it. After outrage from the right and opposition to this jackass's appointment by right-wing leaders all hit the fan, Ingrassia sent a letter to Republicans on Tuesday addressing what he referred to as Politico's hit pieces. Aw, poor widow misunderstood Nazi. Writing, I have no recollection of these alleged chat leaks. I did not have sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky, and do not concede their authenticity. They could well be outright falsehoods, doctored or manipulated with AI, or at the very least, lack critical context. Ingrassia argued that some people cloak themselves in anonymity while executing their personal agendas to harm me. At all costs. Well, that is what happens to people who are the center of the universe. People whose name I had never even heard of until 2 seconds ago. The Trump staffer went on to highlight his efforts to address antisemitism in the White House and his great support among the Jewish community. Yes, I have black friends too. NBC News reported that despite his letter to Republicans, 3 GOP senators on the Homeland Security Committee wisely made it very clear that they would oppose Ingracia's confirmation, meaning that had it gone forward, this nomination likely would have died in the committee before it ever reached the floor. So he forfeited. Senate Majority Leader John Thune stated the general sentiment pretty bluntly on Tuesday, saying he's not going to pass. So, while the right rejects the trash on its own side, Democrats are busy actively defending and excusing their own Senate candidate in Maine, an acolyte of Bernie Sanders who is named Graham Plattner, who has an infamous Nazi tattoo on his chest, a symbol that was worn by SS guards at concentration camps. And this guy has also made repulsive comments, strongly implying that any women in the military who are sexually assaulted by their male comrades are to blame for what happened to them. And as a side note, he apparently belonged to a socialist group that is linked to ICE attacks and Tesla bombings. Needless to say, if it was a Republican candidate who had said these vomit-inducing things and who had a tattoo from the Nazi SS on his chest, every single person out there on both sides of the aisle knows that Democrats would not be defending it as being no big deal, like they are all doing right now. So while they continue to display their own hypocrisy for the entire world to see by protecting the trash on their side, I am glad to see that the right refuses to follow suit for once, because the middle doesn't care about shows of loyalty, and they rightly have a gag reflex to this garbage, and to the people who defend it. So let's not be those people. The left is more than welcome to completely own that territory all by themselves. And speaking of very bad people that the left is busy shielding, on Wednesday, the Daily Wire reported that the Trump administration is seeking to take custody of an illegal immigrant who is accused of raping a woman after he had knocked her unconscious in the sanctuary city of Chicago. According to the Department of Homeland Security, later Jefferson Aruz Medina is an illegal alien from Nicaragua who was waved across our border by the Biden administration in 2024. He received a deportation order just weeks before he is alleged to have brutally raped an innocent 54-year-old woman on August 31st, 2025. ICE immediately lodged an arrest detainer with the local authorities in Chicago following this sexual assault, but Chicago is a sanctuary city who proudly protects illegals who have been arrested for other crimes. That's what a sanctuary city is. You can't come into the jails. Why are you in a jail? You've committed a crime. So they defend even criminals that are this vile. Aruz Medina allegedly dragged his screaming victim across a street and into an alley where he threw her to the ground, strangled her, and then stripped her naked, according to the authorities. The illegal immigrant then repeatedly slammed the woman's head into the concrete, causing her to lose consciousness. According to DHS, the woman eventually woke up and began fighting back, while Aruz Medina continued to sexually assault her. Aruz Medina was eventually spooked by a passing motorist, and he finally fled the scene. The naked victim in this case ran down the street before she came across a worker at a nearby food truck who came to her aid. The Assistant Secretary for the Department of Homeland Security, Tricia McLaughlin, said in a statement that was shared with the Daily Wire, "A real-life nightmare. This criminal who J.D. Pritzker continues to protect viciously attacked an innocent woman who was walking the streets of Chicago. This monster was released into our country by the Biden administration. Governor Pritzker and his sanctuary policies protect criminal illegal alien rapists over American citizens. We will do everything in our power to ensure this wicked criminal never walks our streets again." But the Trump administration will now face an uphill battle as they try to force the local authorities, who are hamstrung by Chicago's sanctuary laws, to honor the ICE detainer and hand over Aruz Medina before he is eventually released, while he is waiting to face charges for rape, assault, sexual assault, and drug possession. Since September, the Department of Homeland Security has flooded Illinois with additional ICE and Border Patrol agents to carry out Operation Midway Blitz, which has resulted in the arrest of hundreds of illegal immigrants. Violent rioters have taken to the streets to block and even assault the feds, who are now also facing bounty threats from the Mexican cartels who are operating in Chicago. But now let's switch gears and finally circle back around to the latest updates on the Russia-Ukraine situation. On Wednesday, after plans for a meeting between President Trump and Vladimir Putin fell through, the United States slapped sanctions on Russia's two largest oil companies. These sanctions are the first that the Trump administration has issued against Russia since he took over in January, and they clearly signal that the president is running out of patience with Moscow. The sanctions target the Russian oil giants Rosneft and Lukoil, as well as dozens of their subsidiaries. But they will likely have little direct impact on the money that flows into Russia's treasury from its massive energy industry. More important than the sanctions themselves, the U.S. Treasury made it very clear, via threats that were issued in the announcement of this new sanctions package, that other countries or entities that continue to purchase Russian oil and natural gas from these sanctioned companies will face secondary sanctions that could be imposed against them by the United States as well. China remains one of Moscow's largest buyers of energy, while India, another major consumer of Russian oil, has already promised to stop its reliance on Russian energy until the war ends. Meanwhile, the European Union joined the United States with their own sanctions package that targets Russian energy as well. The EU's sanctions may bring more direct pain to Moscow's pocketbook because of Europe's reliance on Russian oil and natural gas exports. The United Kingdom approved a similar sanctions package on Russian energy last week in what has become a wave of financial penalties that are targeting Russia's most important export industry. The House Speaker, Mike Johnson, pointed out, "You have to compel Russia to engage in the peace process. They've shown they cannot be trusted. There's a big appetite in Congress to have sanctions like this, and I think it's a very important step." Then, just hours after President Trump canceled a second summit with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest, Hungary, a new barrage of Russian missiles rained down on Ukraine, killing 7 people, as part of Russia's campaign to knock out Ukraine's energy supplies going into winter. So, according to the Wall Street Journal, the United States has given Ukraine the green light to launch its own attacks into Russian territory. Trump denied that report, but on Tuesday, Ukraine used a British Storm Shadow cruise missile to hit a plant in Bryansk, Russia. On Tuesday, Trump said that he had canceled the summit because he did not want to have a wasted meeting. Foreign policy experts say that this was a necessary move by Trump in recognition of the fact that Putin does not feel enough pressure for the peace talks to be productive. Giving Ukraine Tomahawk missiles might change that equation. Just saying. But returning to the war criminals that are inside of our own borders, after last week's bombshell indictment of a Hamas-affiliated terrorist who is hiding out in Louisiana, Senator Tom Cotton of Arkansas is done, as am I, and he is now calling for a thorough, top-down purge of the Biden-era immigration policies that let October 7th participants into our country. On Wednesday, Senator Cotton issued a letter to the Department of Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem demanding an immediate, comprehensive security audit of all visas that were granted since 2021, and specifically focusing on applicants that came from high-risk nations like Egypt, Gaza, and elsewhere in the Middle East. And Senator Cotton did not mince any words about this, writing, since October 7th, 2023, thousands of visa applicants from Palestinians have been processed through Egypt, often without adequate review of digital footprints or terrorist watch list cross-checks. The vetting process for al-Muhtadi's application overlooked easily accessible evidence of his terrorist ties. I urge DHS to conduct an audit of all visas issued through high-risk countries since 2021, prioritizing potential affiliations with Hamas or other designated terrorist groups. And his demands are entirely warranted given this situation. The evidence in this case is truly chilling. As we covered last week, federal prosecutors revealed that al-Muhtadi's cell phone was geolocated near Kibbutz Kfar Aza, the site of one of the deadliest Hamas-led slaughters on October 7th, where 60 innocent lives, some of them Americans, were butchered. FBI documents show that al-Muhtadi issued battlefield commands over messaging apps such as "bring the rifles," "get ready," and "if you have a full magazine, bring it to me." Does that sound like a bystander to you? And he wasn't just a foot soldier either. He was organizing those Hamas butchers. And yet this man, a proud member of the National Resistance Brigades, the armed wing of the violent terrorist group known as the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, was granted a visa and a green card by the Biden administration after applying for it in Cairo, vetting them my ass. This butcher's social media was filled with images of him training with Russian weapons. But all of this somehow slipped right past the State Department's so-called vetting. So, if you aren't going to do your job properly, maybe the entire thing needs to be taken out of your hand by the voters, and we should just not give you the option to let anyone in. Can you hear me now? Because if you push it to this degree, I promise you, you aren't the only people who can get extreme in order to make a point. We can do that too if we have to. Because if that's my choice, let Hamas October 7th butchers in, or let no one in. If you turn that into my choice, I know which one I'm choosing. After you blindly gave this butcher a visa into our country, al-Muhtadi entered through Dallas-Fort Worth in September 2024. He lived in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and then he moved to Lafayette, Louisiana, where he was working in a restaurant, and that was when federal agents finally caught up with him. Senator Cotton warned that al-Muhtadi is just one of many dangerous people who may have quietly slipped into the U.S. under Biden's very lax oversight, and that is why an audit is called for now, to finally do the vetting that should have been done to begin with. So the senator is now demanding a real-time terrorist watch list that would proactively screen any applicants from extremist regions of the world, including immediate enhanced social media checks, so that, quote, no terrorist should be able to slip through undetected. And this is not the first time that Senator Cotton has led the charge on national security. In July, as pro-Hamas mobs defaced U.S. monuments with violent symbols and waved terrorist flags in our nation's capital, Senator Cotton introduced the No Visas for Violent Criminals Act, mandating deportation within 60 days for foreign nationals who were convicted of crimes that were linked to these kinds of protests. And he is continuing to spread the message that America is at risk. Not because terrorists are sneaking across borders, but because they were being invited in by a government that at best was recklessly asleep at the wheel after having been entrusted with a position of power that affects us all. But it turns out that the Biden administration's blind spots weren't just ideological. They are potentially lethal, and they need to be rectified. And speaking of willful blind spots, the ongoing Christian genocide in Nigeria, that you probably haven't heard anything about, has claimed thousands of lives this year alone, but human rights advocates say that the Nigerian government is continuing to turn a blind eye to it. In the first 9 months of this year, advocacy groups estimate that more than 7,000 Christians have been killed across Nigeria, many in attacks where entire communities were burned to the ground. For more than a decade, this pattern of violence has gone largely unreported and thus unnoticed. But American lawmakers, including Senator Ted Cruz of Texas and Representative Nancy Mace of South Carolina, are calling for Nigeria to be reclassified as a country of particular concern when it comes to religious persecution. Senator Cruz told Morning Wire, many in the media share the same woke mindset that they will not call out radical Islamic terrorism for what it is, especially when it's Christians who are the victims. And so it takes the rest of us to highlight this needs to end. Judd Saul, the founder of Equipping the Persecuted, a group that has been on the ground trying to aid Nigerian Christians, said that this crisis has been building up for decades as radical Muslim groups have been taking control of the area. He told Morning Wire, what they have done is they move in, they populate, and once they gain population, they start taking political control. Sounds familiar? And once they gain political control, the killing starts. These deaths often occur among women, children, and the elderly who can't flee their isolated villages. One of Mr. Saul's biggest frustrations is the fact that the world knows very little about this ongoing genocide due to a lack of coverage from the media, who doesn't want to report on anything that upsets their preferred narrative. In this part of the world, the Nigerian government effectively controls what gets reported and what doesn't. And just like with Hamas, Western outlets are perfectly happy to just repeat the official lies as long as they happen to match up with the story that they want to tell, instead of doing their job and sending reporters to verify the devastation themselves and report on the reality. Mr. Saul said the mainstream media never shows up. They just take the government's word for it. And every time Christians are killed, it's always unknown gunmen. But we do know who's doing it. Now footage is emerging out of Nigeria of burned churches, mass graves, and displaced families living under tarps in camps with no food or medicine. But there are no Jews in this story, so there's no faux moral outrage anywhere in sight. But even while the media fails to do their job, a few people in Washington still take theirs seriously. Senator Cruz introduced legislation this month known as the Nigeria Religious Freedom Accountability Act of 2025. It will impose sanctions on Nigeria's officials that are accused of facilitating violence against Christians and other religious minorities. Of course, those Nigerian officials continue to deny that Christians are being targeted for their faith. They're framing the violence as clashes between herders and farmers. But unless you think that this is nothing too serious for a chorus of the farmer and the cowboy should be friends to solve, many international watchdogs like Open Doors and International Christian Concern say that official story is simply false. Mr. Saul says that with the Nigerian military repeatedly responding to warnings about ongoing attacks with complete inaction, many Nigerian Christians are begging the United States government to use its international influence to shine a spotlight on these atrocities. Hence my insignificant contribution to the coverage. Now turning to the stories that are getting mountains of coverage. On Thursday, a widespread NBA gambling scandal was made public, resulting in dozens of arrests, including members of the Italian Mafia and both former and current NBA players and coaches, such as Miami Heat point guard Terry Rozier, the head coach of the Portland Trail Blazers, Chauncey Billups, a former player who is now in the Hall of Fame, and former Cleveland Cavalier player Damon Jones. The charges include wire fraud, money laundering, extortion, robbery, and illegal gambling. In a press conference, the director of the FBI, Kash Patel, said the FBI led a coordinated takedown across 11 states to arrest over 30 individuals today responsible for this case, which is very much ongoing. We also entered and executed a system of justice against La Cosa Nostra to include the Bonanno, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese crime families. The bottom line here is that this criminal case involves two distinct indictments. The first relates to an insider betting scheme in which the defendants allegedly received non-public information, such as when NBA players would be sitting out for injuries or planned absences, and they then used that insider information to place massive bets and accrue profits. The New York City Police Commissioner, Jessica Trisk, said one example occurred on March 23, 2023, in Charlotte. Terry Rozier, an NBA player, now with the Miami Heat, but at the time playing for the Hornets, allegedly let others close to him know that he planned to leave the game early with a supposed injury. Using that information, members of the group placed more than $200,000 in wagers on his under statistics. And indeed, Rozier exited that game after just 9 minutes, and the bets of the people who had been tipped off paid out tens of thousands of dollars in profit. The second indictment relates to rigged poker games that were backed by the Mafia, where more than $7 million was taken by fraud. This scam utilized new technology such as an X-ray table that could read cards that were lying face down, and both current and former NBA players like Coach Billups and Jones willingly acted as face cards, or celebrities who were used to draw in the wealthy and famous to rigged games that they never stood a chance of winning. U.S. Attorney Joseph Nocella said the defendants in this case orchestrated a scheme to use wireless cheating technology to run rigged poker games across the United States. What the victims, the fish, didn't know is that everybody else at the poker game, from the dealer to the players, including the face cards, were in on the scam. Once the game was underway, the defendants fleeced the victims out of tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars per game. These New York area poker games were backed by at least 4 of the 5 infamous Mafia families, and in a twist that feels like it could have been ripped straight out of a script from Hollywood, Federal prosecutors revealed that Kylie Jenner's former New York City townhouse served as the backdrop for these poker scams while she was still the owner. According to the federal indictment that was unsealed this week, Jenner's $20 million six-story Greenwich Village mansion at 80 Washington Place was one of two key sites for an underground gambling ring that was allegedly run by New York's most notorious crime syndicate families. However, there is no evidence at this time that either Jenner or her boyfriend Scott had any involvement in or knowledge of the criminal activity that was going on in their home. But what remains true, either way, is that the same reality empire that turned unearned fame into a global commodity has now, perhaps unwittingly, provided the stage for a mafia-run operation that was designed to victimize others. FBI Director Kash Patel said that this case exposed both La Cosa Nostra's continuing reach and the corrosive influence of gambling on American sports and culture. And since politics has somehow become the main sport of our culture, the frontrunner in New York's mayoral race, Zoran Mandani, faced a lot of criticism this week after his less than stellar performance in the final televised debate of that race on Wednesday. Whether or not this moment turns into the pivotal one, the atmosphere of the race definitely changed that night. Not just because of the controversial policies, which are some truly out-of-touch levels of insane, but also because of Mandani's public failure under pressure during the debate. Even media outlets and their analysts noted how uncomfortable Mandani looked and how hesitant he was. Then at other times, he was so severely flustered and rushed that some of his responses came off like a video that was being watched at double speed. Still, many left-leaning outlets such as Politico and the New York Times declared victory for Mandani, admitting that Cuomo hurt him, but probably not enough. While we wait to see if left-wing loyalty and wish-casting really is enough to make fetch happen, the viral clips of the debate received brutal responses from the public. One of the most damaging moments that is making the rounds on social media came when Cuomo directly and relentlessly confronted Mandani on his extensive inexperience, saying, "You have never had a job. You've never accomplished anything. There's no reason to believe you have any merit or qualification for 8.5 million lives. You don't know how to run a government. You don't know how to handle an emergency. And you've literally never proposed a bill on anything that you're not talking about. In your campaign, you had the worst attendance record in the assembly, and you gave yourself the highest raise in the United States of America. You went from $110,000 to $140,000, and then you never showed up for work. And you missed 80% of the votes. Shame on you." But the big question is, how much impact did this have on New York City voters? Unfortunately, it's too early to tell. Polling data is still being analyzed. But fear seems to be in the air because, as Morning Wire pointed out, it's interesting to note that there are reports that the Chinese-owned platform TikTok, meaning the communist-owned social media app, appears to suddenly be pulling out all of the stops on Mandani's behalf, trying to head off any dwindling support for him. The New York Post reported that TikTok's algorithm has been boosting pro-Mandani content while also suppressing pro-Cuomo clips. And I take that as a very good sign. I could be proven dead wrong, and will admit it if I am. But I still give New Yorkers too much credit to believe that the majority of them are falling for this incredibly transparent bull. I think that polls don't always reflect the size of the silent majority. But we're about to find out. And in the meantime, there is existing happy news to share. This week, 12-year-old Sophia Forches, one of the victims of the mass shooting in August at Annocation Catholic School in Minneapolis by a highly radicalized left-wing trans shooter, finally made her triumphant return home after what her family called a miraculous recovery. This little girl was shot in the temple by someone who had become deranged with ideology, and she had to be placed in a medically induced coma and have part of her skull removed, according to CBS News. Sophia was in critical condition when she arrived at the hospital. Dr. Walt Galagich, a neurosurgeon with Hennepin Healthcare, said regarding Sophia's recovery, "It's only been 2 months or so since this terrible event, and to see her walking around, wanting to go home and go back to school is pretty amazing." Thankfully, this little girl is still with us, and her family released a statement that said, "Your prayers have been powerful. Sophia surviving this horrific attack is a miracle. Her healing progress is nothing short of miraculous, an undeniable testament to the mercy and intervention of our Lord Jesus Christ. Each day, we uncover new revelations of moments and circumstances that kept her alive and made her recovery possible. There are simply too many to be dismissed as coincidence. God has heard our prayers and wrapped Sophia in his healing embrace. It is by God's will that she has come this far. We are eternally grateful to our loving Father who hears and answers prayers." Amen. And speaking of answered prayers, on Thursday, a federal judge struck down a Biden-era policy that expanded Title IX's federal discrimination protections to encompass gender identity and force healthcare providers to perform transgender procedures. The U.S. District Judge Louis Garola, Jr. sided with Tennessee and 14 other states that sued the Department of Health and Human Services over that warped edict. Judge Garola ruled that the HHS had overstepped its legal authority by expanding the Title IX protections of biological sex to include gender identity and thus completely nullifying its original intent. The judge wrote, "In the opinion of the court, Congress only contemplated biological sex when it enacted Title IX in 1972. Therefore, the court finds that HHS exceeded its authority by implementing regulations redefining sex discrimination and prohibiting gender identity discrimination." Judge Garola said that since the Biden-era rule was still in place, the threat of enforcement and legal action is real, and resolving the legal questions at the heart of this suit would provide much-needed clarity. Judge Garola went on to write, "When it enacted Title IX, Congress's concern was prohibiting sex discrimination in education. It was particularly concerned with inequality that female students experienced. It did not, at that time, contemplate gender identity, transgender status, or gender-affirming care," which is obviously true. This was the 70s. Tennessee's Attorney General, Jonathan Skrmetti, celebrated this sane decision from the court, saying, "When Biden-era bureaucrats tried to illegally rewrite our laws to force radical gender ideology into every corner of American healthcare, Tennessee stood strong and stopped them. This decision restores not just common sense, but also constitutional limits on federal overreach, and I am proud of the team of excellent attorneys who fought this through to the finish." The Attorney Generals of Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, Indiana, Kansas, Kentucky, Louisiana, Nebraska, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Virginia, and West Virginia all signed on to this now victorious suit. And as I always do on the last news episode of the month, I want to thank everyone who tuned in and listened to me. Because of you, this month we surpassed 4 times the audience that I had last year. So I want to express my gratitude to all the people who listened in the United States, Australia, the UK, Belgium, Hungary, Russia, Ireland, Singapore, and Ukraine. I am truly grateful to you for giving me a chance. That is it for me. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, I would ask you to please help me build this podcast into a success by clicking the like and follow buttons, because that is what does the trick in making these things successful. And I hope that you come back again next week. Until then, have a good week, my friends.